Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Awareness Podcast. My name is Susan Telford, and this section of the podcast is called Living an Awakened Life. And I'm here today with my guest, Tom Das. Welcome, Tom. It's lovely to see you again. Before we get started on our conversation, I just want to read your bio for those who perhaps are not familiar with you and your work. While Tom has explored many teaching traditions, including Advaita, non-dual Vedanta, Buddhism, Zen, Christian mysticism, Dzogchen and Taoism, as well as more New Age teachings such as the law of attraction, his love is to share the teachings of his beloved guru, Sri Ramana Maharshi, as well as his devotion for Sri Ramana. That said, irrespective of your own seeking background, Tom has an uncanny knack of being able to meet you where you are and facilitate a greater clarity in those who approach him for guidance. Tom lives with his wife and children in London, UK. He holds meetings twice a week in person and online with the intent of sharing this wonderful message of love and freedom from suffering. And you can learn more about Tom at tomdas.com, tomdas.com, and also on his YouTube channel, where he has many, many wonderful videos and teachings. So again, welcome, Tom. It's lovely to see you again. This is our second podcast together. If you have not seen the first podcast that Tom and I did together or listened to it, then I'm going to put the link to that in the show notes for this podcast, because I had a very profound experience that I was not expecting, which really bears out what Tom has said in his bio, that he has an uncanny knack of being able to meet you where you are and facilitate a greater clarity. That's certainly what happened to me. So why don't we start there, Tom? Why don't we start with talking about what happened on that podcast and the effect that the interaction between us has had on my own awakening, and how that represents the way the teaching unfolds. Because I think that's what, I think we said very clearly, or you said very clearly, this is not Tom doing this. If we believe there's a Tom and a Susan, and that this is happening somehow because of those characters, then we're on the wrong track. So just to kind of recap a little bit, during the interview, I asked you a question, something along the lines of, well, how do you point to someone's true nature? How do you facilitate that? How do you do it? Was in essence the question that I asked you. And you gave me an answer. I actually re-listened to the podcast this morning. You gave me an answer and I said, well, Tom, you've told me about it, but do you remember that I kind of pressed you on, because at this point, this desire was rising in me. Something was rising. I don't know if desire is the right word. Something was rising in me that felt very vulnerable as the podcast host who's meant to be interviewing Tom Das. Voices in my head were thinking, is this even appropriate? I'm stepping out of what I'm here to do, what we're here to do. And yet, the teaching was unfolding, or something was unfolding. Something was happening. It's hard to explain in words, isn't it? Something was.
I call it magic.
Magic, yeah.
It's magical. This teaching is magical.
Yeah, it meets you. It meets you where you are. But even then, it felt like the most important thing. I thought, even if this podcast never sees the light of day, it was like a one pointed focus that was, there's something here, Susan, there's something here, and it's to be seen now, and it doesn't matter where the context, where the the context is. um and so, obviously I had been on a spiritual path for a long time. And I kind of said that, I was kind of saying, this is not this is not my first rodeo, Tom. And yet there was still that thing that, there's something, there's just some, that's all I knew. There was something that that needed to happen. And that had I think it's obvious to anyone who has listened to the podcast, and thank you to everybody who's written to me about it, who, quite a number of people have said they came along with me, with us, and they experienced a similar opening just by listening and participating in what was happening. And the effect of that has been life-changing for me, and has really, what if I was to say it in just a few words, that day was the end of seeking for me. And you said something like, the realization of the self is the end of suffering. And that always felt to me like a goal previously. That, there are lots of methods and things and books to read and teachers to speak to, and all of that stuff. And it felt like some future goal. But the biggest thing in that moment was the realization, somehow, that I'd always known this. Not Susan always knowing it, but something knew itself in that moment, and everything changed. So thank you, first of all.
Amazing.
And yeah.
Amazing to hear. Amazing to hear.
Yeah.
I'm so happy for you.
Yes. So let's kind of unpick that a bit and talk about it. As I said, the podcast is called Living an Awakened Life. So what does it mean to be awake? What does that mean, first of all?
Well, I tend not to use that word, but I'm happy to use that word.
What word do you use?
What word do I use? Gosh, that's a good question. I tend to use the sort of more traditional Vedanta style language of self-knowledge, self-realization. And that is the true waking. That is the true being awake, is to actually know what you are. And as you very nicely put just there, this knowledge of what you are isn't ordinary knowledge in the mind. It's not something you can attain or something that can come and go. It's an intrinsic part of you, let's say. It's your actual true nature. And you know what you are always. Everybody knows what they are always. But as you said, it's not known by the body mind. It's deep intuitive knowledge. And this knowledge, as I said, is there latent in all of us, but it's seemingly obscured by all these thoughts and preoccupations. And in fact, by the entire phenomenal objective world, seems to obscure this knowledge.
What my experience was, that what was obscuring that knowledge was the whole identity of Susan, all the beliefs, all the conditioning, all the belief that what I am is an individual body mind in a time and a space, with history, with desires, with preferences, with even the desire to awaken. That's been a major part. That actually, that desire to awaken, that desire to study and meditate and seek, was one of the the image that I'm having is of a shadow on the sun. It's just what popped into my head. But that had become, because I dealt with a lot of the other stuff, but that seeking persona was was actually what was blocking the knowing of the self.
Yeah, it can
And I
be.
couldn't have articulated that. I couldn't have known that, even though I'd heard it. I'd heard it.
Yes,
I thought
yes,
it meant something other than what it actually means.
yes.
But when that happened, then I thought,
I should introduce something else here, because what you've said it better than I have just there. But I should introduce something else, which is that there's another aspect to the teaching, which is non-verbal. And that's what was really happening in our conversation. And let's say I could feel that happening. And I'm sure you could too.
oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
See, we can hear the words many times, the same teachings many times. But there's, when a seeker is in contact, in spiritual contact, or emotional contact, or mental contact, I'm not talking about physical contact. I'm talking about some other kind of contact. When a seeker is in contact with a teacher, and that teacher is coming from a genuine place of truth, let's say, then there's a deeper transmission that occurs. It's a heart-to-heart transmission. It's silent, non-verbal transmission that is palpable somehow. You might feel like it's palpable in the body, or you might feel an impression coming into the mind, but this is deeper than the body-mind transmission. It's deeper than the body-mind level. And because you're willing, or maybe you're compelled to step out of your interviewer role, which is, what you were trying to do initially, at least, as you should have been, that was your role, to interview me. And then somehow you realized there's an opportunity here. There's something here for me. And you seized that opportunity. You allowed yourself to become open to that opportunity. And that's why all these thoughts are going through. Oh my gosh, what am I doing? I feel very vulnerable here. Am I wrong in stepping outside of my sort of designated role here to interview Tom Das, spiritual teacher? And see, that's all superficial. I've got a bio. I'm Tom Das, spiritual teacher, but that's not what I really am. And you might be Susan Telford, interviewer or seeker, but that's not what you really are. So there can be a magic that occurs. I know exactly how it occurs in my heart, but I can't tell you in words. I just call it magic. And it's a silent transmission. And it's interesting to me that other people could receive that, because my initial thoughts would be, I don't think other people really understand what happened there, because it was a connection between you and I. You know what happened. I know what happened, but I think it's almost like secret. It's a personal thing that occurs. Other people might get a sense of it through listening to the podcast, but they won't experience what you experienced, what I felt. And it's not just the words, it's not just the verbal teaching. It's not like, oh, I want to get something. it's a different quality. This relationship between a parent seeker and a parent teacher, the authenticity of you is your authenticity. Yes, you need a good teacher, but a good teacher is useless unless the seeker comes with an open mind, open heart. Open mind doesn't mean gullible, but it just means open. It doesn't mean unthinking or uncritical. It just means open. Open heart is very important to receive I'm using words, it's not really this, but to receive the energy, to receive the sense, to receive the deeper teaching. It's not in words. The words are there on the surface, but there was a deeper transmission occurring. That's my view. What do you think? What's your would you agree with that?
Yeah, completely agree with that. And that receiving of that, or that participating in that, I think is what changed the direction of my own spiritual path. Because the sense was that continuing with the seeking and the trying to intellectually understand teachings, and which I had done for decades, was leading me in the wrong direction. And that may not be the case for everybody. I'm very aware of that. But for me, because it had come on the back of so much seeking and studying and all of that stuff, that my biggest feeling was, I've always known this. And it was not, it was a sense, it was a feeling, something that felt very, very young in one way, very as if almost, I don't know, I can put words on it, but I'm just kind of trying to describe something that's indescribable. But
No, you
almost,
are. I want you to, if it's okay, I would like you to use the words. It doesn't matter if they're, see, because of the nature of these teachings, we often feel like we can't use certain words. Even I do. Even my response, I was hesitant to use words like energy because it's not energy.
yeah,
But I like that word energy, so I used it. So
yeah,
please use the words that come naturally to you. We know it's not literal,
yeah,
but
yeah,
the words that are natural to you have power.
yeah. So it felt very young. Um, I could say it felt very young and very old. But it took me to a
Did it?
remembrance of almost being a baby. And obviously an actual remembering of being a baby, but there was some quality, there is some quality of it that I thought, Jesus said, unless you become as little children, you will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. I thought, that's what he meant. That's what he meant. That childlike, before anybody said Tom, Susan, tree, cup, before, in the Tao Te Ching, how it says, now I've forgotten the quote. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. So the splitting up it was like pre naming. It's hard to talk, isn't it? It's hard to
You're doing a great job. You're doing a great job.
freshness and innocence, an aliveness that, and this is one thing that I really do want to discuss with you, that has taken me back to the world, which seems contrary to some of the teachings but has, because I think I spent decades at seeking that, and so everything was coloured by that. Everything was kind of not enough. You know, we're not like the child in the back of the car. Are we there yet, Dad? I'm not there yet. You know, I'm not there yet. When am I going to be there? How much longer? That kind of
Yeah.
energy
Yeah.
just fell
That's
away.
that's changed. Yeah. I can see.
Away. Just,
Yeah, it's gone.
yeah, yeah. Which has then then opened up oh, oh, look at this, look at this, look at this. Um, a celebration of just this. That's kind of become my mantra. Not that I use a mantra very much, but that if I could just sum it up, I'd say just this, just this, just this. And you're right, it is the end of suffering, because who was suffering? And a great love for that illusory but yet so-called person, who tried so hard, who the sincerity of our heart, the
So what would you now say to other people who want to have your kind of experience, who want to have this kind of realization or falling away? What would you say to them?
stop looking. Stop looking away towards something that feels external. Stop looking to another. Stop looking to the future. You've done all of that, because people who ask these kinds of questions usually ask them because they say things like, I've been on a spiritual path for decades, I've read about it, but I've not experienced it. So what would it be like to drop all that, to drop the seeking for a period of time, and to come back to what doesn't come and go, what doesn't change, and to have faith that there is nothing you can do to get this, that it's not you doing it. So all effort is taking you in the wrong direction. So to come back and to find a teacher, perhaps, who can guide you, because the mind keeps wanting to go, oh, but I'll try this one, I'll do this practice. To have the courage or the willingness to come back and to stay here long enough for something to emerge, and I think every seeker knows what I mean when I say something to emerge, something to there's there's something in us, like a little plant coming towards the light. Honor that, nurture that. What would you say, Tom?
What would I say? Well, I like what you said, but I probably wouldn't say that to them. Do you mind me saying that?
I don't mind you saying anything.
Yeah. When, just to preface, when I meet somebody, usually within a few moments talking to them, I get a impression of everything that is blocking them from liberation. And it's non-verbal. And the challenge is how to communicate that with somebody. I make it sound like it's a conscious process. It isn't. It's just spontaneous. So when I meet somebody, naturally, when they share something with me, a teaching emerges that hopefully is appropriate for them. But I've realized that, see, what you're saying seems to make sense, but there are several reasons why it doesn't work, in my view. And there's several reasons it doesn't work, and it's because, and if you watch some of my earlier videos of when I first started sharing this more publicly, I used to say things more like that. And I realized quite quickly, like within a few months, that the way I was sharing it wasn't working. I've never really been interested in sharing a philosophical style teaching. I want to share something that works, that just does the job. And so, I realized that, oh gosh, the way I'm talking, it's not working. I could feel it energetically, it wasn't working. And the funny thing is that I was actually influenced by other teachers in the contemporary teaching scene. As a seeker, I was listening to all sorts of different teachers and teachings. And so I picked up some of their language. It wasn't sort of, I was trying to copy them, but you pick up the language that you're used to hearing. And so sometimes I used to say things and I realized now I was using their language. And once I started seeing how these sorts of teachings, like, you don't need to look, or there's nothing you can do, these things tend not to work very well. It's not like they're invaluable at all. It's not like they have zero value, but there's some much more powerful teachings, much more powerful verbal teachings. And you actually said them in what you said. It's to come back to yourself. Now, to come back to yourself is not an action like other actions. Almost every other action is a movement away from yourself, we can say. You can't ever move away from yourself, but you can just say every action is a movement away from yourself. And when you cease moving away from yourself and you remain as you are, that is coming back to yourself, which seems like it's something you can do. It's a practice, it's an action. And that's the way I tend to talk about it now, to come back to yourself. And there are certain things that prevent people coming back to themselves. And essentially, to put it in brief, the essential thing that stops you coming back to yourself is when you pay attention to any objective appearance. That means the body, the bodily sensations, the feelings in the body, the mind, the thoughts, any kind of subtle experience in the mind, any kind of like higher state of consciousness or meditative experiences. And also anything in the world, the gross world, like gross meaning coarse, as opposed to subtle. Excuse me. So like, tables, chairs, buildings, cars, things like this. When we pay attention to these things, what happens is that we automatically take ourselves to be a person. Most people can't see this. Most people think, oh, well, if I'm aware of things in the world, doesn't mean I'm taking myself to be a person. I can be aware without the sense of doership, without the sense of personhood. But it's not true. This is something that took me a while to realize as a teacher. Because what happened to me was nonverbal. I didn't have a typical human teacher who was explaining things to me. And what happened to me was direct transmission from Bhagavan Ramana, which is just myself, yourself. Same as any transmission that happens, say, between Tom and Susan. It's not really between Tom and Susan. It's actually from your own self to your own self. But it appears like it's coming from a teacher and being received by someone. It's not really. So as long as we attend or place our attention on what I call worldly things, the body, mind, or world, BMW for short, just as a mnemonic, memory aid, mnemonic. So when you're paying attention to these things, you will immediately think of yourself as being a person. Again, it's very subtle. And it sounds like we're perhaps throwing the baby out with the bathwater, you know, when you're shutting yourself off from so much, from pretty much what we call life. But this is Ramana Maharshi's teaching. Again and again, he shares this teaching with us. And it's also the teaching that's present in all the great wisdom teachings. It's explicitly so in the Advaita Vedanta teachings, the Upanishads, things like this. And there's a reason why this teaching has stood the test of time. It's because it works fantastically well. And it's the direct path. It's actually the only path.
So let's talk about that a bit more, because so you used the word pay attention to. If you pay attention, tell me if I'm getting this right. If you pay attention to the world, you automatically have the sense of yourself as a person. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so in your experience, you have a wife and children and a house and a job and all the stuff that goes with living in the world. How do you not pay attention to that? Or what do you mean by pay attention to, first of all? Because clearly you do pay. I mean, you're sitting there dressed in a blue top, so you clearly paid attention to the fact that you needed to dress to come and talk to me. You're wearing glasses, you know, you're sitting in a room on a couch. So it looks as though you're paying attention to the things of the world. So explain that to me, because you know, I said before, one of the things I wanted to discuss with you was this feeling that I have, which seems the exact opposite of what you're saying, more of a return and enjoyment of the world. So let's talk about that, because I think that's such a source of confusion for a lot of people. How do you function, Tom? How does, yeah, you know the question I'm asking. Yeah.
No, yeah. So I'm happy to answer that question, but I should preface it by saying I can't really, I mean, I'm happy to give you an answer and try and explain this, but I should say it cannot really be explained, that question. That question doesn't have a satisfactory answer for the mind. Okay. The real answer to that question is when you realize your true nature. That question, let's say, is automatically answered. You see the answer. But to properly explain in words, for the mind cannot basically understand how that can be the case. The mind will say, look, Tom, you as you said, you're wearing glasses, you're wearing a blue t-shirt, you clearly are paying attention to the world. People used to say this to Bhagavan Ramana all the time. Said, look, you're walking around, you bumped your knee the other day on the table and you had pain, you're suffering. And this is one of the paradoxes of realization is that ignorance, which is the only problem we have, I define it, and Bhagavan Ramana defines it as one definition, is when you take yourself to be a body-mind entity. And that's ignorance. As long as you think you're a person, a human being, a body-mind entity, something with a limit, then that is ignorance. That's not true. That's a mistake you've made. That's a distortion. Now, when we take
I see that part.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's part of what happened in your shift.
Yeah.
Is that sense of being a person, something fell away.
Yeah.
So when you see yourself as a person, you also assume that there are other people around you. So, for example, young children, they tend to think that everybody thinks and feels the way they do. If they like strawberry ice cream, they'll say strawberry ice cream's the best. And when my kids were younger, I used to see this kind of argument. Sometimes I still do, even though they're a bit older now. Strawberry ice cream's the best. No, chocolate ice cream's the best. The other one will come in because they like chocolate ice cream. And they'll say, no, strawberry ice cream is the best. Not understanding that they're projecting their own experience onto others. And I think, well, I clearly I'm right because I know strawberry ice cream is the best. And they're wrong. They don't realize I'm right because they think their knowledge is the same as everyone. They project their own understanding onto other people, if something upsets them, they'll think that is upsetting in itself. And they'll, rather than not realizing that it might not be the same for everybody. So in the same way, we project our own sense of individuality onto others and we think, oh, there's someone else there, there's somebody else there, there's somebody else there. And we think we're living in a world. And this is all ignorance. None of that is true at all. There aren't lots of different people in the world. There isn't even a world. But through our ignorance, we project these things. We think these things are true. Just like in a dream, you might be dreaming that you're in a world with hundreds of people. And none of that's real. It's just a projection of your mind in sleep. It's exactly the same with our waking state. We project all these things out. They're not real. So back to your question, when you say, Tom, look, you're aware of the world. Or when people say to Ramana, look, you just bumped your knee on the table. You're in pain. I saw you wince in pain. You suffered. He says, this is in your view. You see me as a person. You don't see me as I really am. So when you see the sage or the teacher or the apparent liberated person, there is no such thing as a liberated person. Yeah. That's an illusion. Yeah. When you see the sage and you say, oh, well, Tom, you're looking outwards at things. You clearly are looking outwards at things. That's not true, actually. This is where it gets bizarre. But liberation is bizarre. It's actually not bizarre. It's actually very simple. But from the point of view of the mind, which is totally and utterly distorted, it's got everything the wrong way around. It's bizarre. I'm not actually. You said, Tom, you have a wife, you have children. I don't really. You said, oh, you got up in the morning. I didn't really. But this is how it appears. Like you interviewed me, last year, and you had that experience. That's not really what happened. It's apparently what happened, and we can talk on that level. I'm very happy to. And on that level, Tom does have a life, and he did see a blue t-shirt and things like this, and Bhagavan Ramana did bang his knee on the table. I just made that up. I don't know if he banged his knee on the table.
Yeah.
That was just a made-up example. But this is not the reality. These are all projections of ignorance. So the reality is much more wonderful and much stranger. than what the mind initially conceives when it comes to the spiritual quest for the most part. Now, what can happen is when you have this kind of shift. Are you happy for me to carry on?
Yeah, of course, of course.
And are you happy for me to talk about what happened to you?
Yes.
See, and tell me if I'm wrong. But when you had that shift last time, what happens? It can dislodge this sense of being a person. And there can be a huge sort of energetic shift that occurs with that. And there can be a rushing out into the, maybe rushing out's the wrong word, but there can be an embracing, that celebration feeling. Yeah. Now, typically that doesn't last. That might carry on for like a couple of years, that kind of thing, or some months. But eventually that will settle, and you'll see, I hope, or perhaps, the merit of this kind of teaching, which sounds like the total negation of what you're saying. That's one thing. The other thing is that if you're a seeker, you feel that there's something lacking because you're identifying as something smaller than you actually are. You're identifying it with a lesser being than what you truly are. So you feel that disconnect. And from that point of view, you cannot help but seek. You have to seek. You're compelled to seek. And you will see, I come across many people. And see, do you remember I said that when I meet somebody, I immediately see all the barriers. I see that in everyone. And I meet people.
So it begs the question, doesn't it? What do you see in me?
Well, if you interact, if you spend time with me, if you interact with me, that will be revealed. That will come out in its own time. You know, as I said, it's not like I purposely tell or don't tell. It's just, as you said, it's a natural unfolding. The first thing is there an openness to more? You know, because that's what you had. That's what was so. That's one of the things that allowed. As I said, it's not just about the teacher; it's the seeker. Is that openness is there? Because liberation is just pure humility, total openness in a way. So if the openness is there, then more will come through. If it's not, then the teaching won't come through. At least that's my experience. But I meet people who come to me and say, oh, you know, this has happened, that's happened, I've realized the truth. I just like to hang out with you, Tom. But I can see what's happening. You know, I can feel it. I can feel the energy. I can feel the seeking energy. The seeking energy is still there because as long as ignorance is not completely gone, the seeking energy is there. It'll still be there. It might be more subtle. It might be temporarily sort of not there, but it's still there. It'll come back. It's like an itch that you have to scratch. You can't, you know. So when the seeking will keep on coming back until liberation, it'll keep on coming back. And then usually, because the teaching that I'm sharing is not a very popular teaching. It's not an easy sell, but it works.
What do you mean it works? What does that mean? It what?
it destroys all illusion, all ignorance, all duality, any sense of two-ness or multiplicity, any sense of multiplicity, any sense of individuality, which sounds awful for the mind, actually. The mind typically, most minds don't want that. Some minds do. They're the ones who typically attain liberation quickly. But most minds are afraid, deeply afraid of that. Even if a part of them wants it, a part of them is afraid of it, which is normal. But that is actually bliss. That is your true state. That is your divine being. There's no time, there's no space, no body, no mind, no world, no teacher, no teaching, no seeker, nothing to seek. It's just heavenly, divine being. Words, words fail. And that's what you are. That's all there is. It's not even that's what you are. That's all there is.
There's no you two are.
Exactly. Yeah. You two are, isn't it? It's like 3 characters. No, you two are. That sounds like a
That would make a
1990s
good car reg on your BMW.
I don't even have a car, you know.
Do you not?
I don't know. I managed to live this long without a car.
Yeah, it's a hard sell, because yeah,
What it
I've
is,
obviously got an attachment to the world. Um,
yeah.
but do you know what, Tom? Whatever this is, I feel completely happy. And so I am, there's a sense inside me at the moment, and maybe this is resistance, I don't know, but I'm not going to call it resistance. There's this, if more is to unfold, more will unfold in its own time.
That's
And
it.
for now, um,
I agree.
I'm happy. I'm happy.
And that is actually in some ways the most important thing.
Yeah.
So I would heartily encourage you, to ignore anything I've said, genuinely. If you're happy, not not following my sorts of teachings, you don't have to. I don't want people to. I'm not trying to get people to follow my teachings.
Yeah. You're not trying to sell anything, are you?
No,
We jokingly said hard sell, but there is no sell here.
no, no,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
No attempt to sell. But what will happen is that if it's right for some people, they will resonate with this teaching, and they will perhaps see how it's different from almost every other teaching that's out there on the. If you listen to most teachers, they're not sharing the same thing. In my view, there might be some who are, but most are not. So, most people, well, when it's right, people will see the value of this, and it'll be wow. It'll be like the oasis in the desert. It'll be like, wow, this is so amazing, this teaching. But until then, it's kind of like, nah. And that's the
So
way it is.
yeah, so that really brings us on to talking about the classes that you're going to be giving. I know you don't like the word classes, do you?
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. Well, I don't particularly like it, but
Yeah.
it's fine, But I don't particularly like the word teacher, you know.
Yeah.
But it's fine, because what else are you going to say? What do you, got to say something.
Yeah. So the title is going to be called Many Ways to Freedom. And maybe that clarification of even of the title, because it is, your classes are going to be about the teachings of Ramana Maharshi. So when you say many ways to freedom, you're saying that within those specific teachings. So say more about the many ways within Ramana Maharshi's teachings.
So I should say that the way I put it is that I received these teachings through Bhagavan's grace. Bhagavan means beloved, and it's what I call Ramana Maharshi sometimes. They're not really his teachings. They are his teachings, but they're not, it's a universal teaching. It doesn't belong to anybody. This teaching is within it, all of us. So without an external teacher, without a book, without anything, these teachings are there. They're within us, always. They're actually indistinguishable from our true self, our real nature. And Bhagavan Ramana is just our own self. So if you want to find Ramana's teachings, you go within, you'll find them. There's only one way to the truth, and that is to go within, discover the truth. But there are many, many sort of seeming ways that can happen. Sometimes it might not be the best analogy, but it's a bit like walking through a door. There's only one way you can walk through the door. You just got to walk through the door. Or let's say there's only one way you can go through the door. You've got to pass through the door. But there are loads of different ways you can go through the door. You can walk backwards, you can walk forwards, you can crawl, you can cartwheel. But essentially, it's the same thing in each of these cases. Essentially, it's the same thing. You're walking through the door. So we might have our own way of doing it, as it were. But there's only really one way. But we will come to it in our own way. We have our unique journeys. So this is not about expounding a teaching of some teacher necessarily. This is actually about discovering a genuine truth for yourself. And that truth is just one truth. It's just your own self. It's actually beyond any notion of self and non-self. But while we think we're a person, while we think we're a body, mind, entity, this notion of calling it a self or true self is very important. And maybe that's something I can explain and clarify in the sessions, why it's called the self in this tradition, in the Vedanta tradition, which is probably the oldest surviving wisdom tradition. It might be the oldest wisdom tradition on full stop. I don't know. But this teaching, you can never destroy it, as I said, because even if you burn all the books, the teaching is still there within us, and it will just emerge again when it's ready. Most teachings are a distortion of this teaching, because to the extent that the ego is alive and well, the ego will distort these teachings. And the stronger the ego is, the more it will distort the teachings. And the weaker the ego is, the less it will distort the teachings. So we get these whole grades of teachings, which are all very helpful to seekers, by the way. Just they in themselves, and none of them are liberating. But they can all help you go towards. And as you develop and mature on the path, your ability to discern the true teaching from the false teaching will change. Because that's the process of most seekers are on. When you start seeking, you might be attracted to all these sorts of teachings. And then now you look at them, and hopefully you can say, thank you very much for those teachings. They were wonderful, but they're not for me now. They were for me then. They were helpful for me then. That they're exactly what I needed then, but now something else. As you mature, develop, become more discerning, your ability to discern or discriminate increases as the ego wanes, as the ego lessens. Now, with me and Ramana's teaching, I never liked Ramana's teachings because he's telling you to turn away from the world, right? So I always thought, oh, this is a load of rubbish. Always, I thought, I can't, this is not what I like. I like the sort of the teachers that didn't say that. But what happened to me was that I fell in love with Ramana, and I never liked his actual written teachings. Actually, that's not quite true. What I actually did is I distorted them. I actually found the teachings where he didn't explicitly say turn away from the world, and I convinced myself that they were his true teachings, and the other ones were distortions. So, I empathize with anybody who doesn't like what I share verbally. But it doesn't matter if you like the verbal teachings or not, because if you connect with somebody, if you connect with the teacher, if you connect with Ramana, which is what I recommend people do, I try and it's about me. Some people will naturally connect with me, which is fine. But I encourage people to connect with Bhagavan Ramana, which is you can find in your own heart. Then, it doesn't matter if you believe in the teaching or not, because you'll be guided in a different way. This is what happened to me, at least. I fell in love with him, and that love for him guided me, even though intellectually, mentally, I didn't like those aspects of the teaching. It didn't matter at the end of the day. Yeah. It becomes a love affair. That's what happened to me. So love and devotion and grace are a big part of this teaching.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about next, because a couple of the classes, you're going to do 4 classes, aren't you? First one is the essential teaching of Sri Ramana Maharshi. The second one is the importance of devotion. So speak a little more about that. Devotion to what? It's not to the person, Ramana Maharshi, who was born on a particular date and died on a particular date. What is the devotion to?
Well, you're right. Ultimately, that is not what the devotion is to. It's not to a person or an entity. Ultimately, it's to your own self. But it can be towards a person or an entity. And for me, that's how it started. I felt this love towards what I imagined to be the person of Ramana. And then I felt a sort of, I felt his presence in me. Now, I had no idea if I was, I had no idea if I was deluding myself. Is this really Ramana's presence, or is this just my mental fabrication? I didn't, but to be honest, I didn't care. It felt so amazing. And I felt so in love. And then whenever I saw an image of, a picture of his face or a picture of him, lots of love just started welling up inside of me. So there very much was a sort of personal connection to this historical figure as well for me. And I think reading about his life story really inspired me. Now, not everybody finds his life story inspiring, but for Tom, it was incredibly inspiring. And because Tom's quite cynical by nature, doesn't trust many sort of spiritual teachings, reading about his life allowed me to trust his teachings as well, because I realized here's a guy who's not out to get me. He's not trying to get money from me. He's not trying to fleece me. He's not trying to make me join his group. I mean, obviously he had passed away already, but even while he's alive, he wasn't trying to, you could clearly see he wasn't trying to do that to the people around him. So it allowed me reading about his life. I'm not a scholar on his life. There's lots of things I don't know about his life. I don't claim to be an expert on him as a historical figure at all. But I read just enough of his life that it inspired me and allowed me to, the same opening you had perhaps when we spoke last year on that podcast, I had that opening with him. I let something in. And So it was initially to the person, I think. And then I had a sense of him somehow. It felt really strange, in the sense that it didn't feel very strange. My mind sort of looked down on from above, as it were, and thought, Tom, what are you doing? You know, you're there's no one here. Who are you in love with? What are you talking about? This is rubbish, you know, because my mind could see this is not normal. You know, this is not, you're not meant to pretend or imagine that someone's spirit or someone's presence is in your life and fall in love with them. That wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't what I was looking for. It wasn't my mindset. It was not devotional. But in my heart, it felt really right. So I didn't give the mind a second thought, really. I just ignored that. There was no way I was listening to that mind thing. I was just going to go with it. And it was only sort of after liberation that I started to see the beauty of his actual verbal teachings. It took me a while, actually. Because Tom's mind had to catch up with what happened. On the level of the body mind, Tom's mind had to sort of, what's happened here, you know? And it took Tom's mind a while to sort of figure out how amazing Bhagwan's verbal teachings, conceptual teachings actually are.
What do you see, Tom?
Well, this is the same question you were asking me in a way before, that I can't actually explain, because from the mind's point of view, I see nothing. You know, I don't see myself as having a body or a mind, or there's any time or space. So if there's no time, no space, well, how can you see it? How can I explain that?
But you see something, because otherwise we couldn't have this interaction. You hear something. There is something. I think that's where I've got to. I don't know what this is. I don't know what this is. I don't know. I don't know. I've realized I don't know. But what I do know, or what I think I know, or what I think I experience, is there's something, because we're sounds are happening that are understood and responded to. I can see an image on a screen. There's something here. There's not nothing here.
If you say so.
But what are you responding to? What's happening here?
Who am I? Who are you? Who am I?
Hold on a moment, someone's just come to my door. Excuse me for a second. So that actually is an illustration of what I'm trying to get at. We're talking, we're recording our podcast, and I hear the doorbell, and I look out the window and see a delivery van, and have to stop the podcast to go and see who's at the door. So whatever reality is, something happened there. There was a happening. Something happened, and this responded.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's not nothing.
I understand what you're saying. What you're saying makes total sense. And
But you're saying there is
unfortunately, what I'm
nothing.
saying doesn't make sense for what you're saying makes total sense for the mind. Makes total sense. What I'm saying doesn't make sense. I understand that. That's why, as I said, even for Tom, for Tom, for Tom didn't understand these teachings either. He rejected them. Now, if you're interested, there are on tomdas.com, there are some introductory articles. And some of them go into this in quite a lot of detail. And so I've compiled some of, and if you follow the links in the article, they're like, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 introductory articles. And some of them talk about the nature of liberation, which is what you're asking me. The nature of the sage, the nature of the so-called enlightened person, which doesn't actually exist. The nature of the sage, which there's no actual sage. The nature of liberation. No. Strictly speaking, there's not even a liberation, because liberation is opposed to bondage, and there's no bondage and there's no liberation either. Liberation only exists if there's bondage or suffering, and then there's freedom from that suffering. But if there's no suffering, then there's no freedom from something that doesn't exist. That's getting a bit philosophical, but there are some posts on the nature of liberation. And if you follow the links in that post, if you want to go down the rabbit hole a bit further, you'll see there are a couple of posts that go into a huge amount of detail about the question you're asking. And how can anyone say there's no time, no space when there's experience of time and space? How can you say there is no world? There's no body. There's no mind, when clearly Tom has a body. He thinks, he acts, he does things. And it all comes back to the idea that when you consider yourself a person, you see yourself in a world full of other people, just like in a dream. When you're having a dream, you think, oh, well, there are all these other people here in the dream with me. There are 100 of us in the dream. We're all here in the dream, aren't we? Look, I'm having an experience, you're having an experience. But it's not true. There's a, so I encourage you or anyone listening to look through tomdas.com. On the main page, there's some introductory article you can read, and come back to me with any questions if you want to. There's a huge wealth of information on tomdas.com, actually, all different levels of teaching. So it's well worth looking at, I think.
Including our podcast on your homepage, I noticed.
And I put that on my homepage. I told you I would, because I think it's such a wonderful interaction. I think one of the things missing on tomdas.com is this. There's a huge part of the teaching that is relational, that comes through interaction. And again, people watching may get a sense of it, but it's not the same. And so a lot of sort of teachings on tomdas.com, but what it doesn't necessarily show is the relational way it's delivered. And even with many of my videos on YouTube, that's not fully captured. But I thought that podcast really nicely captured that. So I put it straight onto the I took off. Do you know what I took off? Do you know there was another video there? I took off the Buddha at the gas pump video.
Oh,
there you go. And I put that one.
If I was a person, Tom, I'd say I was highly honoured, but we can't go there, can we? So the third class is the importance of self-inquiry. Say just a little about self-inquiry.
Self-inquiry means to know what you truly are. And it is the same thing where we fall back into ourselves. We let go of the body, the mind, the world, all objective appearances, and fall back into this pure beingness that we are, which transcends the body, mind, and world. And when we do that fully, completely, we come to know ourselves as we truly are, in which there is no body, there's no mind, there's no world, there's no space, there's no time, there's no person. But you are still there without any of these things. And then there's an intuitive realization where yourself realizes itself. And that is liberation. And that essentially is the only way to liberation. That can be called self-inquiry, because you're going towards yourself, discovering what you are. It can also be called surrender, because you're letting go or surrendering the entire phenomenal universe. You're giving that to God. You're saying, God, you look after that. I'm going to go to myself. That's just one way of framing it. It's also devotion, because you can't do that unless you're devoted to yourself. And if you're a lover of Ramana is just yourself. Just so when you fall in love with Ramana, say you fall in love with the name or form of Ramana, the person, because of who he is, you'll eventually realize that he is yourself, and you come back to loving yourself. We intrinsically love ourselves. So this is also devotion, the highest devotion.
Yeah. And there are many pitfalls and distractions and obstacles, and
Yes.
that's the topic of your fourth class.
Yes. And that's the thing.
You've said how not to realize your true nature.
Well, one thing that Bhagavan does very well in his teachings is that he explains the path to realization, what it is, and he also explains what it isn't. And that's very important, because otherwise we think we're following the correct teaching, and we're not. We're actually following a distortion or an illusion. If we just stay true to our heart, we'll never go wrong. Problem is, many of us don't, or we think we're following our heart, we're actually following our mind. Many people tell me they're following their heart, but when we go into it, we start to realize they're following their mind, their ego. And so, yeah.
Okay. So I look forward to being with you in these classes, which are October the 2nd, 9th, 16th and 23rd. And if you want to join Tom for these classes, and the information will be in the show notes attached to this podcast for you to learn more and to register to join us. So thank you so much, Tom. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and to be with you. I appreciate it very much.
I'm nodding my head because the feeling's mutual.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for listening. Bye bye.